Okay, so today is Monday, April 17th. Shh. And we're going to continue on with the digestive system, and we're going to finish it. Quick reminder, digestive system quiz on Wednesday. Most likely I'll stick to 25 questions because it's that nice, perfect little sheet, okay? There will be no identification pictures on it, okay? This is a serious quiz, so like the regulatory stuff I'm asking you about, you need to study that, okay? Remember, you do have homework. It's just those two little sheets on Moodle. If you do choose to do the extra credit coloring, that's due on Wednesday at class time, and I will not be accepting late extra credit at all, okay? So if you want the extra credit, you've got to turn it in on Wednesday in class, okay? That's all the announcements I had. Okay, so starting on slide 45, we are to the large intestine. Woohoo! So we've talked a little bit about the cecum already, because this little pouch, so this is the cecum, this is where the chyme from the last segment of the small intestine dumps into. So last segment is the ileum. And so that lovely chyme dumps into the cecum, this little pouch. At the bottom of the pouch is where the appendix is, okay? And there are lymph nodes, so there's immune function. And so when it does become inflamed, or if any material possibly from the cecum gets into the appendix, it can become inflamed and infected. And if it bursts, that's a bad thing. So that would be appendicitis. And so we try to make sure people get treated and have that appendix removed if necessary, because you do not want an appendix to burst inside and then the infection just spreads everywhere. Okay, so different sections of the colon. You have your ascending, which right here. You have your transverse, descending, and then your S, the sigmoid colon, okay? And then where the waste products collect until you're ready to expel them, the rectum, okay? So those are the major sections of the large intestine. Excuse me. Notice on this picture, I know it's kind of small for you guys right now unless you're looking at it on your computer, there's like these yellow little blobs that they're showing here. Those are called epiploic appendages, and they just have fat in them. It's pretty normal to see it on large intestines. Everybody has it. I've seen it on cats. Not sure about mink, but I'm pretty sure they're going to have them too. So just kind of an interesting bit of anatomy. Those little fat pockets hanging on the sides of the large intestine. To the rectum, right here, so where waste is collected, it is very muscular. Don't know. Yeah, it would make sense that it's muscular, right? So if someone is trying to defecate, that helps with the whole defecation process. Okay, then you have, excuse me, the anal canal. And I mentioned last week that there are two sphincters. You have an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter. And the interesting thing to note here is that the internal sphincter is made of smooth muscle. Okay? External anal sphincter is of skeletal muscle. So what does that tell you? You can control which one? The external, and what about the internal? Yes, so the internal is involuntary, the external is voluntary. So basically, if you have waste products pressing down on your internal sphincter, at some point there will be a reflex that relaxes it. Then it's pressing on your external anal sphincter, which luckily for you have control over, so you can control when you use the restroom or not. But, okay, let's see. Hemorrhoids. Random fact about hemorrhoids. Maybe I was naive as a kid. Like, even at your age, I really didn't know what hemorrhoids were. I had to literally look it up. to find out what hemorrhoids were. Because, like, you see commercials, I'm like, what are hemorrhoids? So what it is hemorrhoids, you have these inflammation of veins that are in the anal area. And sometimes, it comes from, like, really straining. Like, if you were, like, really straining to go potty. Or pregnant women giving birth can also get this, so it's from straining and putting pressure in this area. And the blood vessels kind of in this anal canal and the rectum can become enlarged and actually kind of hang outside of the anus. And apparently it is very, very painful, and it's easy to get infections. And so avoid lots of straining because that can lead to hemorrhoids. Also, from what I hear, excessive sitting could also be an issue. So just get enough fiber in your diet and you should probably be okay. Okay, what types of things are secreted in the large intestine? Well, first of all, we already remember that our whole digestive system is controlled by most of it, by the parasympathetic division, which is the rest or digest division of the autonomic nervous system. So you have parasympathetic stimulation. We still have mucus in the large intestine. We've already kind of talked about why that would be important to move this semi-solid material through this large tube. If there was no lubrication from the mucus, well, it'd be hard for it to move along, and you would get what? What would happen to you? Constipation, and probably very painful bowel movements, probably even accompanied by blood. Okay, because it's just not going to be a pleasant experience without the mucus. Okay. On the other hand, what if there was like a lot of mucus? It's possible diarrhea, or things are just very slippery. Yeah, things would come out real easy. Okay, so secretions, back to the large intestine secretions. So there's a couple of different kinds of pumps that are pumping out or in different ions. And so first of all, we know we have bacteria that lives in our large intestine. Actually, the bulk of your excrement is bacteria. And the bacteria is actually very helpful bacteria as long as it only lives in your large intestine. You don't want it to get anywhere else because then it won't be helpful. So bacteria produce acid, okay? And so what happens, there is an exchange, so these exchange pumps down here. This is bicarbonate for chloride ions. And we can exchange sodium ions for hydrogen. Uh-oh, I hit the thing, sorry. Let's see. Yes, I know it's disconnected. Oh, now it's connected. There we go. So you have these exchange pumps, so bicarbonate for chloride, sodium ions for hydrogen ions. There's more that bacteria do. One of the really important things is bacteria produce vitamin K. We don't make vitamin K. And I believe the only way we can get vitamin K is from the bacteria in our gut that make it, and then we absorb it. So it is very important. Bacteria are what is responsible for gas. Any gas that you may have in your large intestine, that is a byproduct of their digestive process. And it smells because of the bacteria. The bacteria, because it's, I'm forgetting, it's methane, I believe. So the gases, well, there's other types of gases. The gases produce flatulence. I remember in second grade, Mrs. Bollinger was my teacher, who is retiring this year now. We were going on a field trip, and this boy named Cedric in my class, I still remember, was farting in the van. Maybe I shouldn't have used that word, but Mrs. Bollinger didn't like her second graders using that word. So she told us we needed to use the word fluff. And we thought it was the most hilarious thing ever. And I'll be honest, in fact, it's still a joke with my family that you fluffed. Okay, little story about Mrs. Bollinger. Okay, So gas is formed from breaking down carbohydrates like beans. So for example, if you make your own beans and you didn't soak them long enough and rinse them, well, there's actually chemicals in there that help produce gas. So if you're going to make your own beans, you better soak them at least 12 hours and rinse them. Soak them even longer. You'll get rid of more of the chemicals that produce that gas. Just as an FYI, artificial sugars will do it. So, you know, all those diet drinks and artificial sugars. I don't honestly think any of it's good for you. Artificial sugar, bad. High fructose corn syrup, bad. Just go for the real thing. Your body will thank you. Okay, so what is in your feces? Okay, so water. We know that a lot of water is reabsorbed in the large intestine, but there still is water, otherwise they would be like solids. You know, you wouldn't want to pass that. Undigested food, so like plant material, we can't break down plant material. That's why we call it fiber, and it helps things move along in your digestive tract. Bacteria can help break down plant material. That is very, very helpful in our digestive system, and many animals that eat just plants end up having really long cecums for the bacteria to break down the plant material because it takes a long time. And just as a FYI. Microorganisms, those healthy bacteria, and then sloughed off cells from your large intestine. Okay? So, movements within the large... Wow, this is a busy picture. Sorry, guys. Spend some time with this. I'm only going to be able to touch on the highlights of this picture, but you're going to need to spend a little time with this to kind of see the flow of how this is working, okay? The page is probably, it's from an older edition, so it's probably not the same page anymore, but it probably is very close to the same page in your textbook. So I would really recommend that you take a look at that and use that to help with your studying. So, mass movements. The very beginning of the chapter, we talked about two types of movements. We had peristalsis, which moves things in one direction, okay? And then we had our mixing or segmental contractions, which mix the food. Mass movements is basically peristalsis within the large intestines, like where it's really moving the stuff along and you're like, oh, time to go to the bathroom, okay? That's the mass movements of a lot of the material that's in your large intestine. Okay, and usually, I think I mentioned this before, usually it's triggered after a meal or a heavy, like a meal. See people, you see it with dogs, like if you feed your dog and like 30 minutes later you take it out to go potty, it poops because it ate. I don't know, maybe I'm the only person who's noticed that. Okay, so mass movements are common after meals. People usually, a little bit after a meal, feel the urge to go to the bathroom. Because it's triggered by that meal, you filled up your stomach, and you got to start making room for things to continue to move along, for the new food to move along the small intestinal tract and then into the large intestine. So you got to empty out some of the large intestine, okay? So you have the enteric plexus, local reflexes that all work together with this. And it is started by the presence of food in the stomach and the duodenum. So food in the stomach and the duodenum is going to trigger these reflexes in the large intestines to start these mass movements of the material within your large intestine. So we have a gastrocolic reflex that the stomach initiates, and then we have the duodenocolic reflex by the duodenum. Okay, so two reflexes. So, really quick, looking over here at our stomach, the stomach initiates the gastrocolic. So this one right here, gastrocolic. So the presence of food will trigger the mass movements in the large intestine. And then here is the duodenocolic. Sorry, just want to say it. Duodenocolic, which would be stimulated by the process of chyme in the duodenum right here, okay? Both of those trigger basically the peristalsis within the large intestine and propelling food along that large intestinal tract. Okay, defecation. So the actual process of going, number 2, begins with a reflex. And I mentioned this before, but so when after the chyme has moved through the sigmoid colon and enters into the rectum, I told you it kind of starts filling up and storing there. And as that waste products are filling up the rectum and are kind of storing there, waiting for you to defecate, it causes some stretching in the walls of the rectum, so distension. And so that will trigger the defecation reflex, okay? And so the distension of the wall of the rectum triggers this reflex. And so what happens, let's see here, usually, okay, there's a lot more arrows going on, and I wanted to explain this. So with the stretching of the rectum, so you are triggering local reflexes, and what it does, so number 4 here, this means, so what happens is your internal anal sphincter, which is smooth muscle, relaxes, okay? Then you really feel the pressure on your external anal sphincter, which is usually the trigger of, oh my goodness, I need to go use the restroom, okay? So your defecation reflex tells your internal anal sphincter to relax. You have voluntary control of telling your external anal sphincter to relax, okay? So when both of those relax, and then you also contract the muscles of your pelvic floor, you're able to defecate. Woohoo! Okay, digestion, quick review. So there's 2 main types of digestion. We have the mechanical digestion, which is primarily with your teeth. You're breaking food up into smaller bits. And this can continue in the stomach because the stomach is churning, but primarily, chemical digestion is what's happening in the stomach with all of those digestive secretions and the hydrochloric acid, and then that continues, the chemical digestion and mechanical digestion continues in the small intestine, except for there's no more acid in the small intestine. Okay, so just remember chemical, you're using enzymes or acid, okay? Mechanical, this can happen with your teeth, so chewing, or segmental contractions can also help break it up. Okay, so once food has been broken down small enough into individual molecules, they can be absorbed by the blood. And where does the blood go? So you've absorbed some wonderful nutrients into the bloodstream in the small intestine. Where does that blood go first before anywhere else? Okay, so you just ate some food and you have absorbed some nutrients into the bloodstream in your small intestine. Where does that blood go first before it can go to the rest of your body? Liver. Yeah. So the blood has to go to the liver first because that's where detoxification occurs. Some of the nutrients will be stored there. Your liver is helping to protect the rest of your body from too much chemicals, etc. So it helps to try to filter out the harmful things. One of the examples we talked about was ammonia. But in previous classes, we've talked about, medications, alcohol, anything that could be potentially dangerous. Your liver is going to try to detoxify those to prevent it from going to the rest of your body. That's one of the big important functions of the liver. Okay, lipids. So we're going to talk a little about lipids. We're going to talk about cholesterol, just a little bit. There's different types of lipids. So like steroids. Steroids, the class of steroids are really they're all cholesterols. Cholesterol. fat-soluble vitamins. So, for example, we've talked a lot about vitamin D. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. So is vitamin E. So you can actually store those vitamins. They can build up. You can store them in your fat reserves, which is nice. The non-fat solubles, you take a pill, like you take vitamin C, that's water soluble. It flushes through your system in a day and it's gone. Okay, so you take vitamin D, it's in your system for a lot longer because it's fat soluble, so it can be stored in the fat. Phospholipids from membranes, cell membranes, fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D or E. So bile salts are secreted in the duodenum. And what's really interesting is that these bile salts surround fats and glycerol to form these kind of balls. And I'll show you in the next picture. But they're called micelles, or micelle. I could be pronouncing it wrong. I'm sure I am. I'm not the best at that pronunciation. Okay, so we're going to talk about different categories of these lipid balls, essentially these micelles. I think it's micelles. And so chylomicrons, 90% triglycerides, 5% cholesterol, 4% phospholipid, 1% protein. So these little balls they go into the bloodstream and they travel throughout the bloodstream until they get to the adipose tissue where then they can be stored. Okay? So it has to travel through your bloodstream to get there. In the blood, triglycerides, which are those fatty acids, okay? So they're converted back to fatty acids and glycerol, so they're broken down and then they're transported to the adipose tissue. So wanting to talk about, first of all, so you see these little round ball shapes. Those are the micelles. That's what they look like. And there's different types depending on how much protein a micelle is carrying. Okay, so all the lipids that are in your bloodstream are being carried. They're being transported in a molecule. So they're not just floating around on their own. They're being transported in these micelles. So cholesterol, first of all, you get most of it, 85% is made in the body. Now I am going to make an assumption that the book is assuming we're all meat eaters. And so we would get some from the food we eat. So it says 15% is ingested. As I've mentioned before, you could have a complete animal-free diet and still have enough cholesterol. You need the cholesterol for your plasma membranes of the cells. Okay, that's what it's for. So you manufacture it in the liver and in the intestine, which is really interesting. Okay? So, one important fact that we need to pay attention to, lipids are lower in density than water. Okay, so first of all, if lipids are lower in density, if we mix fat and water, which one's going to float? The fat, okay? And then proteins are higher in density. So if we put proteins in water, proteins would sink. So if we mix lipids and proteins, the proteins counteract the lipids' light density because the proteins are heavier. So it helps make these little balls of lipids and proteins able to travel through the bloodstream without precipitating out. Okay? So there's 4 different types we want to talk about. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So number 1, a chylomicron. Okay, this top one here. The majority of it is lipid, and 99% lipid, 1% protein. So very low density. This is going to actually enter into your lymphatic system. It's very interesting. And then we know that through the lymphatic system, this little molecule will travel through. It's not going to be dangerous or need to be filtered out, and it will eventually enter into your bloodstream. Number 2, VLDL, which means very low density lipoprotein. Right here. Oopsie. Number 2. And this one has more proteins with it. And notice, you've got cholesterol inside. So you're transporting cholesterol within these micelles. And so it is still mostly lipid, 92% lipid, 8% protein. These are made in the liver, okay? And then once it gets to the fat tissue, the adipose tissue, the triglycerides are removed, stored in the fat, and then the micelle becomes what we would call a low-density lipoprotein. So that's number 3 right here. So if you lose some of those triglycerides, which are in this kind of this orangey color here, and you add some more protein, you have what's called low-density lipoprotein, which is 3/4 lipids and 1/4 protein, okay? So you got more protein, so the density is increasing. It still is low in density, but it's increasing. And so this molecule, the low-density lipoprotein, LDL, is looking for receptors, okay? So it's transporting cholesterol to specific areas that have receptors for these low-density lipoproteins. Once it binds to a receptor, it's able to take in those lipids, those cholesterol, into the cell. If it can't find a receptor, then this low-density lipoprotein just continues to travel in your bloodstream and travel in your bloodstream. Okay? Come back to that in a second. Number 4, high-density lipoprotein, and this is where you have almost equal amounts of protein and lipid. So 55% lipid, 45% protein, and this molecule, the high-density lipoprotein, takes those lipids to the liver. So low-density lipoproteins are transporting cholesterol to cells that have receptors for them, and the high-density lipoproteins are transporting those lipids to the liver where they're going to be stored. Okay, so what does all this have to do with anything else? There's a disorder called familial hypercholesterolemia, and this is caused when there is high levels of low-density lipoprotein in the blood. And a reason there would be a high level of low-density lipoproteins is that perhaps there are not enough receptors to take in these molecules into the cell. If you don't have enough receptors or no receptors, the low-density lipoprotein continues to build up in your blood, which we know that's bad because that increases your cholesterol numbers, and we already know that high cholesterol is not good for your health, especially your heart and blood vessel health. So if you have a lot of low-density lipoproteins, it says it accelerates or speeds up the development of what's called atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of these cholesterol, buildup of the cholesterol on the walls of blood vessels. And so this can lead to heart disease and heart attacks. So if a person has familial hypercholesterolemia, let's say they're your age, they could have a heart attack and die at your age from high cholesterol. Even if they were very active and very fit, they don't have enough receptors to take the cholesterol out of their blood, and so it can lead to heart disease and heart attacks at very young ages, which is really unfortunate. This is an interesting term, xanthomas. These are like little knobs or bumps of cholesterol or fat under the skin. And usually this is seen more at joints. I've seen pictures of these things. And they're usually like around elbows and stuff. They're like these bumps. And sometimes they can get really big. And it's just these knobs of cholesterol and stuff. It's caused when there's a mutation in the receptor gene. So it's usually an indicator that someone has a problem with the gene, that maybe they have the familial hypercholesterolemia. It's kind of a side effect along with the heart disease and heart attacks. How severe a person has the disease depends on if they have just one chromosome for the disease or two. If they just have one chromosome, it's a moderate disease. If they have two chromosomes, like they got one from their mom and one from their dad, then this is the cases where very young people, even younger than you, can have heart attacks from high cholesterol and die due to familial hypercholesterolemia. Okay, this is a genetic disease. Okay, so I will ask you a question about this. Okay, so remember that it's genetic. It has to do with how many receptors you have. If you do not have enough receptors, where is that cholesterol going to go? It's going to stay in your bloodstream and build up. And then what can that do to you? Heart attack, heart disease, all bad things. Okay, so please remember this. Okay, a little bit about protein. Pepsin. We talked at the very beginning of the chapter, we talked about pepsin. Pepsin breaks down proteins. Then we have what are called proteolytic enzymes. And these will actually make small peptide chains of amino acids, so little chains of amino acids. So like 2 amino acids together, dipeptide, or a tripeptide would be 3. These amino acids are absorbed, then they travel through the bloodstream, straight to the liver. Woohoo! And we know the liver makes some really important protein categories like the albumins, the globulins, the fibrinogen. 3 important proteins right there. So, amino acids getting to the liver is very important. Okay, last slide for this chapter, talking about water and ions and where are they being excreted out of the digestive system or put into it. Okay, so yes, water can move in either direction in the small intestine. It can either move out or water can come in, depending on the needs. And so, depending on osmotic gradients. So, this is just talking about concentration gradients again. So, if there is a high concentration of solutes inside the small intestine and much lower outside, then the water is going to want to flow from the outside of the small intestine towards the area of higher concentration, because this is osmosis, so it's a flowing of water in the direction of higher concentration. So ions that are important: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphate, these are all transported. And so what direction are they transported? It's not going to tell us. Sometimes it's transported back into the body, absorbed back into the body. Sometimes it's excreted out. Most things are going to be reabsorbed. So when it says absorbed, you could actually just say reabsorbed. Okay. So notice this. So you have up to 2 liters of fluid secretions in your small intestine. The majority of that, 92% of it, is reabsorbed in the small intestine. So most of the water is being reabsorbed in the small intestine. And then here's our large intestine section. 6 to 7% of the water is reabsorbed there. So this hopefully helps cement the fact that the majority of nutrients and fluid are being reabsorbed or being absorbed in the small intestine. Yes, water is being absorbed in the large intestine, but the majority of it is being absorbed in the small intestine. Okay? I have emphasized that several times because people have mistaken those facts in the past. Okay, so what I'm going to do really quick is stop this recording.